Go.
Right. My name's Ogden. I am a systems administrator and I'm currently working for a great blockchain company, sorting out their infrastructure and deployment. Always looking for the next big thing, especially in the cloud industry. So shortly I'll be off to London to work with a great company which is 100% on AWS. So this is where my knowledge comes in. So today I'm going to talk about cloud security and the importance of why you should secure your hosting. So I should have played this slide a second ago. So my name's Edward Ogden. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've written a paper about why you should consider spending a little bit more money on your hosting instead of going for the cheap and cheerful. So feel free to look me up, have a read. As I said, at the moment I'm a DevOps engineer. I've been a sysadmin for the last 5 years. I come from a web development background, but I've been moving towards the sort of management side of the web industry. Okay. So, what I'm here to talk about, the actual role of a server. Now, servers aren't just what you think hosts your website or your application. They're actually used in quite a lot more things, especially IoT. We'll then be talking about cloud computing, and OWASP actually provides some brilliant information around cloud security. So I'll talk to you about some of the top 10 security risks that they point out. And where hosting is actually moving, where is the industry actually going towards? You know, it's no longer the basement of a building with a load of servers. It's moving towards a cloud, a serverless future. So we'll talk a bit more detail about that. Okay, so what is the role of a server? So you might think a server, something you put a website on or your application, and hey presto, you're bringing on customers. Well, yes, it does do that, but it also stores your data, such as personal information on you, on your customers, financial details, and physical storage. So these are files you might upload to your servers. The types of servers we have the cloud, we have data centers where you can hire out racks and manage yourself for additional fee. We've got on-premises. This will be in the basement of your IT, for example, serving your NAS or your SAN. We've got your physical computer. As a developer, most of us will actually host a little server on your development machine to test your code. That is still a server. And we have household kit. Like I just said, IoT. A lot of these devices will have a little web server running on them. This is so you can set it up and configure. But these are all servers. So let's dive into cloud computing. So what is cloud hosting? Well, cloud hosting is an on-demand self-service. It's very easy to manage and requires very little effort to get started. It gives you broad network access. This is speeds you can't even get in your own house. You're talking 10 gigabits and beyond. It makes it brilliant for additional bandwidth. Resourcing pooling. You can resource everything into a group. You've got unlimited access to it, and it's absolutely brilliant. Rapid elasticity. This is essentially scaling. So you can scale to an infinite amount, and you can also scale downwards. And we've also got measured services. You can actually monitor your cloud services a lot easier than you can monitor physical servers. It's all at your fingertips. We have 3 different main service modules: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is primarily you're going to, go on AWS, get a VPC, a virtual private network, and an EC2 instance, this would be a server. And this is a physical or this is a cloud representation of a network of a data center, which is right at your fingertips to manage without actually handling any hardware. You've got platform as a service. This allows you to utilize other platforms already produced. For example, AWS has Lambda. You can upload your code, maintain your code on there, and you're instantly away. And software as a service, well, this is things like hosting your website. This is all pre-done software that allows you to host with ease. So moving on to the top 10 security risks that OWASP actually list out. I've got my notes here. So OWASP have a list of the top 10 risks. So let's go through them. We've got number 1, accountability and data risks. In traditional storage methods, this is all at your control. It's in your physical servers. You're right there, and you know where your data is. With cloud hosting, you don't know where it is. It's a lot harder to control, and the responsibility is then shifted on to your data provider. So you no longer have ownership of your data. Number 2, user identity federation. If an organization is moving their services and applications from one cloud provider to another, they should have proper control over over their user credentials. Instead of allowing cloud providers to maintain identities and authentication overheads, instead allowing them to maintain single sign-on methods, be that SLAM. So number 3 is regulatory compliance. So regulatory compliance is making sure that your application, your hosting, is complying with local law enforcement, local law, and maybe where your hosting is in another country, you've still got to comply with their laws. So there's a few examples coming up which we'll look into. And I'll do one more, which is business continuity and resiliency. This is where the IT organisation performs to ensure that the business can conduct in disaster scenarios. So, looking at the first one, which was accountability and data risk. What can you actually do to reduce your risks? Well, you need to understand how the cloud provider secures your data and how they detect and report any compromises. This would most likely be in their SLA or terms and conditions, and it is definitely worth checking out before you choose your cloud provider. Next one is geographical location. Now, things especially like with GDPR, you've got to make sure your data is compliant with law. So having a European application hosted in America might not work for you. This is because your data is actually then transported to a country where GDPR is not relevant, but for you, it still is. So you need to make sure where your cloud provider is actually hosting your data, and a lot of that can be found just by looking at your cloud provider's website. Then we look at knowing the situations and what happens with third parties or government. A lot of companies will have local law that says government gives them the right to seize your data, and it might not work for you here. You might not be in China, but the Chinese government can ask any company within its roof we want to see what you have, and they have to freely hand it over. So do make sure that you choose the right provider that has good control over its data. Primarily, you want to look at one that's not going to be affected by local government. Verify that your provider actually destroys the data when you delete it. A lot of companies, AWS S3, I believe when you delete your data, they still have a backup somewhere amongst their S3 network. Their S3 network is all around the world, and it's replicated. So when you delete your data, it might take a while for them to actually delete it through their entire network. So you want to verify that when you delete something, it is deleted. And as I said before, check your provider's service level agreement and terms and conditions. You need to know where the responsibility lies in the event of a data breach, be that data breach through their side or data breach through your side. I've got an example from July 15th, 2009. So what happened is Twitter disclosed that they had a hacker access their subsystem, and where the company data was stored through Google Apps. What was the cause of this? It was a hacker hijacking someone's company's email. And this was mainly found out to a weak password. So you as individuals are the #1 target for a hacker because that's their way in. And especially for those who actually manage the actual servers. Once they get your access, that's it. It's a golden ticket for them. So, looking at the user identities, what are our risks for using user identities? Well, managing identities across multiple providers can be very messy. It's hard to keep track of, and if you've got a small IT team, they're not going to be able to keep up. Less control over user life cycles. So this will be how long a password is retained for. So say you update your password every 7 weeks. You know, they have less control over that. They don't have the systems in place. And user experiences, it's not very good. Usually it'll be you have an account for every service you're using. And it just means you've got to remember more and more and more. Now things like LastPass really do come into play here, into their own. You just remember one password and then the rest is all there. But this can also provide another security risk. So what are the mitigations for these risks? Well, you can create a federated identity. Did it say it right? This is a single control access. A lot easier to maintain for your IT staff, and you only have to remember one login. OAuth on backend integrations. This is logging into your systems. You're not going to have lots and lots and lots of logins for every server. You can replicate that across multiple. And tighter user provisioning controls. Lock down your access. You don't all need root. Your developers don't all need root. You can create individual users. A lot easier to track, a lot easier to maintain permissions. Regulatory compliance, right. So, as it says here, your customers are your responsibility. That is key. That's a key sentence there. You're responsible for your customers' data. So what are the risks for regulatory compliance? Well, data that so your data might not be as secure as you think if it's in another country. Be that because they're not as good as securing, or it's more accident-prone country. Lack of transparency in the underlying makes it difficult for owners to demonstrate compliance. So smaller cloud providers might not be able to meet your regulatory compliance. Lack of consistency standards and requirements for global regulatory. So there's no consistency over different countries. They're all different. They all act in a different way. And European law is very different to US. US is a lot more open, and it's a lot easier to get your data lost. The EU has a lot more controls over securing your data, locking down, and it is more focused on the end user. So business continuity. Another use case, a scenario. In March 2009, Microsoft Azure suffered an outage over the weekend. I can imagine that's very bad for those websites, those apps. No one can use it over the weekend. It's probably their peak time. So what are the risks that lie here? Well, lack of know-how and capabilities. If you're a web developer that's never hosted a server before and just thinks it's as simple as uploading your code, in most cases, if you're paying for decent hosting, it's not as simple as that. There is a lot of setup that goes with a server, and especially on the security side. Cloud providers might not be acquired by or a cloud provider may be acquired by a consumer competitor. So let's take this very bizarre scenario that Google decides to buy Amazon. That's not going to be good for anyone. You can imagine what Netflix might think, who are all on AWS. I'm trying to think of another one who's on Google. There's many of them. But if your competitor is on another cloud provider to you, and they merge, you might have an issue with your SLA or your terms and conditions. And monetary losses due to outages. So your server is out over the weekend. That's not good indeed, and you might be losing business. That's money down the drain. That's going to impact you quite a lot. So what can we do to back this up? Well, ensure that your customer's recovery time is fully understood. So as a cloud provider, make sure that you understand your client's needs. As a developer, make sure you understand your customer's needs. You need to have some sort of SLA there that says you do allow for some downtime, because you will take your servers down for maintenance. So ensure that your cloud provider has an existing business continuity plan. What happens if they go down? What are they going to do? And how will it affect you? Check if your cloud provider actually has management support and a review of their continuity business plan. Do they periodically review it? And verify if your provider actually is up to standards, such as BS 25999. So there are many more. Let's go back. There are a few more up there. You can find a lot more information about these on OWASP's own website. They do have a project for this, which is the OWASP Cloud Security Project. Strongly recommended if you're starting out for the first time for sort of cloud. It's worth having a look at. There's some very useful tips on there on how you can actually make your hosting more resilient. So on to the future of hosting. Where is hosting going? We're seeing it's gone from physical machines in a warehouse for your local business all of a sudden to the cloud. And it's taken a little while for people to transfer it into the cloud. So it's now in the cloud. That's a good step forward. So what's the next steps for hosting? Well, one of the main things that I know I'm seeing out there is serverless. Now, what is serverless? How can it be serverless? Serverless is more of a service as a software. Service side of things. So, SaaS. It's where you give your code to your cloud provider and it runs straight away. There's no management of any Linux kernels, any networking. It's just upload code and straight away it comes back to you. You're running on serverless. It's also very cost effective. It scales a lot better than just normal cloud hosting. Containers. We're seeing a lot with containers. Docker, Kubernetes. They're two main competitors out there in containerization. You might have, let's say a Node.js application. If you can put that in a container, you make your life a lot easier when it comes to deployment. There's a lot less overheads to manage. NoSQL. NoSQL is growing very quickly. It's something I've been reading upon where it's a lot more efficient to manage in terms of processing. It does have its challenges though. In my mind, I've struggled a bit to try and get an application working with NoSQL, but it's just my lack of knowledge. So something else, as I said earlier, it's migration from on-premises to the cloud. A lot of companies have now done this. I take, for example, the company I'm going to be joining. They only in the last 2 years have managed to successfully complete their teraflops worth of data onto the cloud. And it's taken them almost 5 years to do so. But they are now 100% on the cloud. And the other one is automation. Automation is growing upon the cloud. It's a lot easier to manage. Automation allows you to spark up as many servers from a template. I'll take, for example, an AWS service called CloudFormation. You design your network layout, your service layout, upload it to Amazon, press go, and next thing you know, within a few minutes, you've got your full stack deployment ready for you to put your application on. So automation is very, very useful and it's growing. It's something I'm looking forward to in my new role. And that's it. I know I've been a rubbish speaker. It's the first time. But questions, if you have any. Yep.
How relevant do you think some of those comments are about choosing a cloud provider now there's only really 3?
So there is 3. There's AWS, there's Azure, and there's Google Cloud. I think you've really got to look at what you're planning on hosting because they do provide slightly different services. AWS seems to be growing the fastest and providing a lot more compared to the other 2. But AWS is a lot harder to manage. It's very cut raw with AWS. And I think they do aim towards the people that actually know what they're doing. With Azure, it's a lot easier. The setup guide with Azure is quite literally just a load of drop-downs, clicks, and next thing you know, you've got a server up and running. And Google Cloud I haven't actually had a lot of integrations with. They're slowly picking up steam. They haven't been as fast growing as AWS and Azure. And this is most likely going to be down to some privacy issues. Everyone thinks, oh, Google, the all-seeing eye. And it's difficult for people to actually trust Google here because of their past. But their services are very nice. They've got just as much to offer as Amazon or Azure. It's just, I think it's taken people a while to trust them. So in terms of choosing your provider, I think it's much consideration as possible in terms of what your skill is. If you're a Linux person or Windows person, you know how to set up a network, then good. AWS is quite cheap and it's quite good if you know how to do it. If you're more starting out and you don't know how to set up a network, Azure comes into its own, especially with the experience I've seen. It's a lot more click this button here to deploy a virtual network, which is absolutely brilliant. And then Google I haven't actually had much interaction with at all.
But we've got basically zero choice on security controls. They're all much the same.
They all pretty much offer the same level of security. They're all very much, it's down to you to tailor how you want to secure it. It's very much, they pass the buck on to you. They don't want the responsibility of managing your security, because if they manage your security, it's then their problem if it goes wrong.
That's not quite true with Azure.
Yeah.
Azure do quite a lot of...
They do.
I was
going to stop talking at that point. But
Azure's one of the better ones. Azure has... Microsoft have done a very...
They have a responsibility framework. I'm afraid I've read all these, so
that's fine. Azure have done very well in terms of security. Microsoft has really built up that area.
Yeah, because they're doing hand-holding. They want to reduce the barrier to entry. I see Azure, based on what I've used with Azure, I see Azure more as if you're a newbie to this, Azure's quite good to go with. They're a lot more easier to...
It seems a lot of those decisions are around experience rather than security considerations.
Correct, it is. Yeah. It is. I mean, AWS does have a lot of security features, but they offer them as additional services, whereas Azure actually has that baked into their system.
Yeah, except that everything on Azure is another microservice that you pay for, so...
Not true, because the Azure... I've had Azure cloud services before. You start it up, you get the option with it, which is part of the Microsoft security package.
Yeah, but there are different levels of the Azure security package. That you get a basic one, and then there's advanced ones, and etc.
Well, it's much like AWS, you get those, and Google. They all offer the same level, but I just find that Azure is a lot more user-friendly to read your security compliance.
Yeah.
There's a lot more options around data regulatory. Do you need this to be GDPR compliant? Well, fine, checkbox, enable GDPR compliance rules. So
yes, the same thing as AWS has launched that service 2 weeks back back to US. They had a conference, AWS Reinforce, and they have launched the AWS Hub for the basically automated things so they have launched the service AWS Hub,
I mean they're all competing with each other, so you all find that they are very similar.
Yeah.
It's just in my personal experience, AWS is more aimed at those people who know how to use AWS.
It's expert friendly, whereas
Azure
is designed to reduce barrier to entry, make it easy to get hooked in, etc. Yeah.
Just right, yeah.
But to be honest, I use DigitalOcean a lot for my personal stuff which is cheaper for a cloud. But again, that also offers the same sort of a security things. But whatever I needed for my personal stuff, whereas Azure is Azure or AWS is costly for me. So again, it's up to...
Yeah, it's all, I mean, choosing your provider is all down to personal preference. I mean, you don't even have to go with the big three. You can go for other services. You've got things like, especially in the UK, you've got Rackspace, you've got Bytemark.
So I will say we are getting the hell out of Rackspace, ProAct, self-hosting in Manchester. All of that stuff is getting burned as quick as possible.
It is.
It's a nightmare. Compared to moving all into AWS.
Or that's as expensive to manage.
It's because you end up in legal negotiations with that responsibility. Whereas these guys, it's written down.
The thing with Rackspace and AWS, they're smaller compared to
not AWS, Bytemark. they're a lot smaller than AWS, than Microsoft, and Google.
And
So
they've come from traditional hosting, whereas your Google, AWS, and so on, and Azure haven't done. They haven't come at it from traditional hosting. They've come from it from, we're going to do a cloud, and that was more or less their starting point. Whereas a lot of the other people are people who used to do traditional hosting.
correct. So they're old school methods
Yeah.
trying to catch up to the 21st century.
Yeah.
The thing with AWS is that it was actually an accident. They created services to host Amazon's own platform, and they turned out they had way too much. They actually ordered way too much resource, and the way they actually tried to recuperate some of that cost, which was to essentially hire out some of the space, and that's how AWS was really born.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Any more questions?
So, if you're on something like Rackspace, how easy or difficult is it to migrate to something like Azure?
Well, the thing with Rackspace is that they're actually moving towards a support model for AWS. I remember the previous company I worked for, we were with Rackspace, and they actually said, we're no longer going to focus on hosting servers, we're moving towards the support model. And they actually tried to get us to migrate.
Yeah.
And they actually have a service, they will help you migrate to AWS, but it is additional costs, of course. We didn't use it because at the time we're quite happy with Rackspace. Their customer service is quite good, and especially if you run into issues with your server, if you're paying for it, Rackspace support is top notch from what I've seen.
Being rubbish for us at the moment.
Well,
Just leave it alone.
okay, this was 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Maybe they've
experience
changed
may vary,
since. This is part of their. We always expected that Rackspace were going downhill compared to
Yes. Yeah.
the big networks. They can't compete.
Yeah.
And same with Bytemark, they can't compete. So they're moving towards a support model rather than a hosting themselves model. But they've still got to support their legacy customers.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you.
Well, for a certain amount of time. I don't know whether that's going to last forever.
I think you'll find they won't go away that easily. They won't go down without a fight. And they, as I said, they've moved towards a support model. That's keeping them afloat in the meantime. And if you are a company that really is afraid of, managing your servers, people like Rackspace are good. They can manage it all for you.
Yeah.
The same with Bytemark and many others.
Yeah.
Any more at all? Nope. Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As I say, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I do occasionally post the odd paper or two. They are a bit more lengthy than this talk, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.